Tonight, we begin with the strange contradiction at the heart of power. Imagine velvet robes, jewel-encrusted crowns, ceremonial swords drawn not for battle, but for parades. Imagine palaces where every step echoes with reverence and every breath a subject's silence. This is the world of kings and queens, of emperors and crowned divinity. But power, no matter how dressed in gold, cannot escape the awkward finality of death. Now, what if that death is absurd? What if a king dies, not in glory but in gluttony? What if a royal heart stops mid-laugh, or worse, mid-toilet? Yes, that is what we are exploring tonight. Not the noble victories or the regal processions, but the last strange, often ridiculous moments of those whose lives were shaped by pomp and pride. You'll hear about rulers who overate, overstepped, or were outwitted by forces as humble as dessert, or as invisible as gas. So lie back. Let the day slip quietly away. Close your eyes if you wish. You don't need to follow each word. Let my voice carry you gently across time. A calm current winding through palaces and battlefields, into throne rooms and tombs. Because even kings die, but not all of them die like kings. The winter wind had teeth that February evening in 1771, but within the gilded halls of the Swedish royal palace, King Adolf Fredrik was comfortable. He sat at a long table adorned with silver platters and glowing candelabras. Lobster, caviar, smoked meats, pickled vegetables, wine, all in abundance. He was not ruling. He was not advising. He was not contemplating the welfare of his people. He was feasting, and then came dessert. Semla. This seemingly innocent pastry is a beloved Nordic treat, a soft wheat bun filled with almond paste, topped with whipped cream and served in warm milk. It's indulgent, comforting, heavy. 1 is enough, 2 is excessive. Adolf Fredrik ate 14. Yes, 14 bowls of semlor, swimming in milk, one after another. The servants watched, likely unsure whether to intervene. The king was in good spirits, perhaps chuckling between bites, but by nightfall he clutched his stomach. His groans echoed down the marble corridors. Soon after, he collapsed. The cause? Digestive issues, they wrote. The truth? He ate himself to death. This was a monarch remembered not for war or reform, but for dessert. His legacy, the cautionary tale of a sweet tooth taken too far. And so, the man who once held the crown of Sweden left this world not on a battlefield or in royal bedchambers, but at the dinner table, bested by pastry. October 25th, 1760. London wore its usual damp chill. King George II, then 77 years old, awoke and began his morning routine. It was ordinary, even mundane, a bit of toast, a word to his valet, and then nature's call. The king walked to his private lavatory, alone, as he always did. Moments passed, then too many. A servant knocked. No answer. Inside, they found the monarch slumped forward over his chamber pot, lifeless. The official record states an aortic aneurysm, sudden, fatal. But what lingered was the setting. The king had died on the toilet. And not just any toilet. This was a royal commode, crafted for majesty. Gilded, cushioned, private. A place of solitude, yes, but hardly one of glory. His final moment was not framed by curtains and candlelight, but by startled gasps and a toppled porcelain seat. George II, who ruled over wars and colonies, who debated parliament and navigated dynasties, ended not with a proclamation, but with a plop. To this day, he remains the only British monarch known to have died on the loo. His final words, lost. His final act, unforgettable. History, in its wisdom, does not always reward greatness. Sometimes it rewards timing. And in the case of George II, that timing placed him on the most awkward throne of all. Let us sail now, Back to the Viking Age, 9th century. The Orkney Islands, wind-lashed and shrouded in mist. Here ruled Sigurd the Mighty, a fearsome Norse warrior, feared by foes and followed by men. He wore iron and arrogance, and he claimed lands as easily as you or I might claim a seat at the table. One day, Sigurd challenged a Scottish chieftain named Bright. The two men agreed to settle their feud with a duel. Each would bring 40 men. But Sigurd, ever clever, or so he thought, brought 80. The duel turned. Massacre. Sigurd won, of course. He had twice the force. He beheaded Bright and, in a final act of dominance, tied the severed head to his saddle, the teeth grinning against his thigh. Victory tasted sweet, until the ride home. Somewhere along that cold, muddy path, the chieftain's head bounced. Against Sigurd's leg, one of Bright's teeth scratched the Viking's skin. Just a tiny puncture, a foolish thing. But within days, the wound swelled, infection spread, fever burned. Sigurd the Mighty, conqueror of men, slayer of clans, was killed not by sword or spear, but by a corpse's tooth. He died from a dead man's bite. Irony? Divine justice? Perhaps both. The bards never forgot it, nor did the winds of Orkney, which still carry the tale of a warrior undone not by war, but by hubris and a jawbone. We now turn to 18th century Korea, where courtly rituals and Confucian order ruled every breath. Crown Prince Sado was the heir to the throne of the Joseon dynasty. But unlike his father, King Yongjo, the prince's behavior was erratic, violent, unstable. Some say he suffered from madness. Others believe he was a victim of the unbearable weight of royal expectation. Regardless, stories circulated that he beat servants, that he roamed the palace with a sword, that he posed a danger to the royal household. The king could not execute his own son. Confucian law forbade it. Yet to allow Sado to live was to endanger the realm. And so a decision was made. A rice chest. It was a wooden crate used to store rice, airtight and stifling. One summer afternoon in 1762, Crown Prince Sado was summoned to the palace courtyard. A chest was placed before him. He was ordered to climb in. He obeyed. The lid was shut, and for 8 days, Sado remained inside. No air, no food, just silence and darkness. The heat rose. His breathing slowed. The cries, at first loud, grew faint, until they stopped. Sado died alone in that wooden coffin of grain, not by sword or poison, but by slow suffocation and starvation, ordered not by an enemy, but by his own father. His son, King Jongjo, would later try to rehabilitate his memory, but the story remains, chilling and quiet. A prince buried alive by blood and duty. Close your eyes. Let the fog roll in. The wind carries salt and legend across the Orkney Islands, a scattered arc of rock and grass where the sea never sleeps. Picture dark waves crashing against mossy cliffs. The sky is the colour of hammered iron, and somewhere beyond it, the ancestors whisper. It is the 9th century, the time of the Norse. Here ruled a man they called Sigurd the Mighty, a Viking earl of strength, fury, and hunger for conquest. Tall, fierce-eyed, armoured in iron and reputation, he had earned his title through blood and blade. Sigurd was not a king, but he may as well have been. He governed the northern isles like a storm governs the sea, loud, relentless, and feared by all who met him. He was not a man you crossed, and yet someone did. His name was Brigte, a Scottish chieftain, a man with a noble name, a wild spirit, and, most notably, a large set of teeth. His nickname? Brigte the Buck-Toothed. Now, history doesn't tell us whether the nickname was feared or mocked, but what it does tell us is that there was bad blood between him and Sigurd. Perhaps a land dispute, perhaps a long chain of raids and retaliations. Whatever the cause, the tension between them boiled over. A challenge was issued, a duel. Sigurd proposed they meet with equal forces. 40 men each. No tricks, no armies, just 2 warbands on an open field to settle the grudge. Milebright agreed, but Sigurd was a Viking, and Vikings did not play fair. He brought 80 men, not 40, twice the force, twice the swords, twice the betrayal. The battle was swift and brutal. Milebright and his warriors were overwhelmed, cut down in the cold wind, their cries swallowed by sky and soil. In the aftermath, Sigurd surveyed the field. He dismounted. He walked among the dead. And there, among the bodies, was Milebrigte, lifeless, defiant even in death, his hair matted with blood, his jaw clenched, and those buck teeth bared like a final curse. Sigurd, filled with triumph and pride, ordered his enemy's head cut off and tied to his saddle. It was the ultimate insult. To ride with the head of your fallen rival bouncing at your side was to proclaim victory to all the land. So Sigurd mounted his horse, and the procession began, his warriors marching behind him, the severed head thudding softly against his thigh with each step. And then, a tooth, one of Milebrighte's famous buck teeth, sharp and exposed, scraped against Sigurd's bare leg. Just a scratch, barely noticeable, but wounds, even small ones, are dangerous things, especially when they come from the mouth of the dead. At first, it must have seemed trivial. Sigurd, the victor, returned to his stronghold with celebration. Horns were raised, mead flowed like river water. His warriors sang songs of conquest and cunning. He had won, and with little loss, but that tiny scrape began to itch. Then it swelled. The skin turned red, then angry purple. Fever followed. Sigurd began to sweat through the night. His heartbeat thudded, not with strength, but with panic. The might that had defined him now ebbed away with each ragged breath. He had faced blades and axes. He had crossed stormy seas and taken fortresses. But none of that prepared him for the bite of the dead. The infection spread quickly. His leg darkened. His vision blurred. He could no longer rise from bed. The great Viking earl, Sigurd the Mighty, was reduced to a husk, dying, not in battle, not by sword, not even by betrayal, but by the tooth of a man he had already killed. Within days, he was dead, just like that. One scratch, one moment, one grotesque twist of fate. It's hard not to feel the weight of irony here. Sigurd, whose name evoked fear from Norway to Scotland, whose raids left villages burned and temples emptied, was undone by his own pride. Had he honoured the agreement, 40 men against 40, perhaps the duel would have ended differently. Perhaps he would still have won, perhaps not. But by cheating, he earned not only scorn, but a wound that history could not help but remember. It's said that the gods of the Norse loved tales of vengeance and balance. What could be more poetic than a warlord falling to the remnants of the man he dishonoured? In later sagas, his story became legend. Children whispered it beside fires. Elders nodded slowly as they spoke of the man who won too much and paid too dearly. And Milebrigte, though few records of his deeds survive, his revenge, unintentional as it may have been, became immortal. If you stand today among the grassy cliffs of Orkney and let the wind rush past your ears, you might still hear it. Not the clash of swords, not the roar of armies, but a strange echo, the thump of a saddle, the rattle of bone, the laughter of fate. Some say the ground remembers, that the moss under your feet grew fat on the spilled pride of men who thought themselves above justice. And if you close your eyes, you might imagine Sigurd riding through mist, his banner trailing behind him, unaware that death rode with him, tied to his own saddle. The world doesn't always end with thunder. Sometimes it ends with a whisper and a wound. Crown Prince Sardo's given name was Yiseon, and when he was born in 1735, astrologers proclaimed that heaven had rewarded the Joseon court with a brilliant heir. In the candle-lit corridors of Changdeok Palace, silk-clad ladies, whispered prophecies of a golden future. His father, King Yongzhou, was already an elderly monarch obsessed with propriety, protocol, and the delicate balance of Confucian order. An obedient son was meant to secure that order for decades to come. The boy's childhood, however, was woven from dread rather than destiny. Sado's tutors reported that the prince trembled at thunderstorms, hid from portraits with stern eyes, and sometimes refused to change his robes, claiming demons lurked in the folds. Little peccadilloes became court gossip. Court gossip became official concern. By adolescence, he was expected to master the 4 books and 5 classics, yet the smell of ink allegedly made him nauseous. The king, who had buried older sons and feared for the dynasty's stability, pressed harder. Pressure cracked what fragility was hidden in the prince's mind. At 20, Sado suffered nightmares so vivid he slashed the air with a wooden sword. Servants said he spoke to invisible companions in the lotus ponds. Whenever walls felt too close, he bolted into the rain, letting monsoon water soak his hair, until he rediscovered calm. The court healer called it wind in the mind, an ill tide of humours. Others muttered witchcraft, ancestral vengeance, or karmic debt. Violence followed. In the palace laundry wing, a maid delayed with a wrinkle in his sleeve. Sado struck her with the bamboo bat used to beat linens. On another afternoon, he ordered a eunuch to kneel so he could test how cleanly a blade cut through top knots. Someone bled nearly every week, and the corridors grew hushed whenever soft slippers approached. Nobody knew if the prince carried a fan or a dagger. King Yongzhou was torn between fatherly sorrow and royal necessity. Joseon law forbade a son from being executed by his own father. Familial piety was the spine of the state. But leaving Sado unrestrained risked scandal, revolt, or worse. Ministers proposed exile. Scholars suggested spiritual purification rites. The king prayed in Hall of Eternal Longevity, then paced until dawn. Finally, he settled on a compromise both cruel and, to his mind, merciful. Death delivered without, the stain of execution. On a July afternoon in 1762, palace guards assembled a rice chest in the courtyard. It was a rectangular wooden crate, head-high and thick as a wardrobe, the sort used to store milled grain for winter rations. The interior smelled faintly of husk and cedar. By imperial order, Crown Prince Sado was summoned. Witnesses say he bowed once to his father. Some claim he begged forgiveness, others that he stared blankly, as though seeing nothing but clouds. He stepped into the chest. A lid slid over the opening. Iron nails sealed it shut. No scroll recorded. A final statement. Only the muffled thud of fist against wood testified that a man still lived inside. Guards withdrew to the eaves. Summer heat wrapped the courtyard, turning the chest into an oven. Hours stretched into days. Servants brought bowls of water and set them on the flagstones, for show rather than salvation. No hole had been drilled for a straw. On the 5th day, sobs were heard no more. By the 8th, silence attained a permanence the king dared not contemplate. Court astrologers selected an auspicious moment. The lid was pried open, and officials found the prince curled like a child among imagined grains. King Yongzhou ordered white mourning garments, but forbade wailing rituals normally granted to royalty. Official annals recorded that heaven had judged an unfilial son. Yet guilt clung to the throne room like incense that will not fade. The queen wept behind screens. Ministers avoided one another's eyes. Outside the palace, commoners pieced together rumors. Some pitied the prince. Others praised the king for protecting the realm. None spoke loudly. Years later, Sado's own son ascended as King Yongzhou. He renovated libraries, championed new scholarship, and discreetly rehabilitated his father's name, commissioning murals that depicted Sado in silk rather than madness. Still, the rice chest endured as symbol. A coffin. One enters walking. A lesson in the limits of power and the terror of losing oneself inside palace walls. Even today, Korean historians debate diagnoses: schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, complex, trauma. But diagnoses cannot erase the echo left in Changdok's courtyard. Tour guides lower their voices when they reach the spot, and cicadas seem to slow their chant as if memory itself bows. Stone slabs remain warm in July. Visitors swear the heat feels different there, thick with sorrow that cannot be written away by edict or filial rites. In the hush of such remembrance lies the prince's paradoxical legacy, a warning that rigid virtue can breed cruelty, and that a single wooden chest can reveal how fragile dynasties truly are. The story lulls us precisely because it resists easy judgment. Madness or martyrdom, punishment or protection, duty or despair. It is the ambiguity that settles over the listener like twilight, bidding the mind surrender its certainties and drift, weightless, into uneasy dreams. A hush settles over the stone city of Barcelona as dusk folds into its narrow medieval streets. In the royal palace, torches hiss against damp walls, and corridors smell of cold granite and beeswax. It is June of 1410, and King Martin of Aragon, sometimes called Martin the Humane, sometimes Martin the Ecclesiastic, lies ill in his great carved bed. He has ruled 2 kingdoms for a little more than a decade, presiding over courtly disputes and papal quarrels, but in recent months his life has become a quiet rhythm of stomach pains and whispered prayers. Digestion, the physicians say. Bad humours, perhaps, or an imbalance of black bile. They bleed him, feed him broths, recite the Psalms of St. Luke. Nothing relieves the churning inside. Martin is no tyrant, yet neither is he a legend of daring, feats. He favours parchment over steel, diplomacy over siege. He suffers fools politely, though he has never had many fools to hand, until tonight. For this evening, craving distraction from cramps and gloom, he orders his attendants to fetch his jester, the fool, a wanderer who comes and goes with the seasons, has been absent from court for weeks, perhaps spending his coin in coastal taverns or chasing rumours of miracle wine in the Priorat hills. He arrives breathless, hair tangled, clothes smelling faintly of stable straw and sea spray, but his eyes sparkle like flint when struck by steel. The king dismisses the physicians and gestures for the fool to sit at the foot of the bed. Curtains flutter in a shy breeze. Somewhere in the palace, a lute is tuned, one plaintive string at a time. Martin asks the jester why he is late. The fool bows theatrically and begins a tale. Some versions claim it was no more than a single joke. Others insist it was a rambling story layered with wordplay and animal absurdities. Regardless of length, it revolves around a vineyard, a fig tree, and a young deer hoisted upside down from a branch as punishment for stealing fruit, its tail flapping like a linen flag of surrender. The image strikes Martin's mind with the bright crack of slapstick. He smiles, then chuckles, then releases a broad, open-throated laugh that shudders down his arms and rattles the bed frame. Courtiers outside the curtain exchange relieved glances. At least His Majesty is amused, they think. The jester, encouraged, embellishes further. Maybe the deer talks in Latin, maybe it curses like a sailor, maybe it insists it is a nobleman, suffering an unseemly fate. Each twist tightens the spring in the king's chest. Laughter turns into gasps. Tears migrate from the corners of his eyes, down into the sparse grey of his beard. A stitch forms beneath his ribs. He waves at the jester to pause, but cannot find enough breath to speak the command. The attendant's smiles fade. They lean forward. Martin's laughter sharpens, then fractures into wheezes like bellows starved of air. His hands clutch his abdomen, wrestling pain that coils deeper with every convulsion. He laughs harder, not because the story grows funnier, but because his body has leapt a ridge beyond voluntary control, where laughter becomes seizure. His diaphragm spasms, and the churning that plagued him all day erupts into violent contractions. Somewhere between a final bark of mirth and a choke of reflux, King Martin's heart misfires. Silence falls. The fool's grin collapses into horror. Courtiers rush forward, but the physicians, summoned again, need just a glance. The king's eyes are glassy coins, his pulse a vanished tide. They place fingers under his nostrils, then lower their heads. One physician whispers the Latin for, "It is finished," and pulls a brocade sheet across the monarch's chest. News swirls through the palace like a startled flock. Some attendants weep, others stare, stunned at the ridiculousness of fate. A few whisper that the devil must have, perched upon the jester's shoulder. Yet no one orders the fool imprisoned. Perhaps they know the king himself invited the jest. Others argue the jester should be rewarded for delivering a painless end, better laughter than dagger. Historians later trade theories. Aneurysm, ruptured, diaphragm, heart attack, brought on by gut distress. But the chronicles, equal parts reverence and rumour, preserve a simpler verdict. Martin laughed himself to death. His passing opens a chasm atop Aragon's throne. There is no surviving legitimate heir strong enough to unite nobles and clergy. Pretenders assemble genealogies by candlelight, counting cousins twice removed. Diplomats sharpen quills, soldiers polish pikes. Within months, the compromise of Caspi convenes to resolve succession, but mistrust already grips the kingdom like winter ice on olive leaves. It is said that in the long debates leading to new coronation, no one dares tell a joke in the audience hall. Beyond politics, the king's eccentric death plants a seed in popular memory. Village storytellers spin it into parable. Beware excess joy, they say, for laughter cuts more surely than sorrow. In taverns from Valencia to Zaragoza, drinkers act out the scene of the deer in the fig tree, roaring with mock hilarity until someone pretends to choke and the table hushes, half laughing, half afraid. Artists paint miniatures of a crown slipping, as its wearer collapses in mirth. The image sells well, reminding merchants how swiftly fortune topples those perched on velvet cushions. Centuries pass. Scholars sift letters and ledgers, searching for more mundane truth. They note that Martin's digestive troubles may have weakened his heart long before the jest, that chronic flatulence and abdominal ailments can signal latent cardiac strain. They point to medieval medicine's ignorance of electrolytes, diet, and the slow corrosion of unhealthy indulgence. Yet none of these rational footnotes dislodge the poetry of the tale. The notion that a king, expected to embody gravity and decorum, could be felled by a single burst of laughter is simply too perfect. History clings to stories that make us shake our heads and smile in the dark. In modern Barcelona, tourists drift through the Royal Palace Museum. A guide lowers her voice near the chambers where Martin spent his final hours. She avoids quoting the joke. No contemporary text records its full wording. Yet she lingers on the soft cruelty of the outcome. Visitors often respond with uneasy giggles, as if the ghost of that fatal laughter echoes still between the beams. One candle flickers in a draught. Someone coughs, and another guest hushes them, suddenly aware of the line between hilarity and hush. Outside, the Mediterranean exhales a warm breeze down Las Ramblas. Musicians play jaunty melodies, children chase pigeons, and the statue of a medieval king stands solemn on its plinth, unreadable. Pedestrians pass without knowing that within that marble heart lies a story where joy became weapon, where a jest outlived a dynasty. Sometimes, as dusk lowers and Catalan sky turns indigo, the gulls cry overhead, harsh, barking notes that sound almost like laughter. Those who know the legend pause, glance upward, and wonder if King Martin's spirit finds the sound amusing, or if it reminds him, eternally, of the joke that ended everything. In the hush that follows such reflection, listeners often feel the lesson settle upon them, that power is fragile, that laughter is double-edged, that balance between relief and excess is as thin as silk. The tale does not demand tears, nor does it rebuke merriment. It merely invites us to consider how swiftly the body can turn delight into demise, how a single errant breath can carry a monarch from hearty indulgence to the cold quiet of history's footnote. And as sleep's veil drifts across our minds, the image of a dying king smiling amid candlelight reminds us to breathe slowly, let laughter soften rather than shake us, and trust that a gentle chuckle may be safer than a roaring guffaw. The summer air beyond the palace walls of Xianyang hums with cicadas, but inside the imperial residence the atmosphere is as cool and dim as the interior of a buried tomb. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, the dragon of the Central Plains, paces a length of polished black stone, silk slippers whispering with impatience. He has conquered 6 rival kingdoms, stitched them together with laws and roads, and declared that the House of Qin would last 10,000 generations. Yet beneath the lacquered armor of glory pulses a single, relentless fear, that his own heartbeat might cease before the world fully bends to his design. Ever since an assassin's dagger brushed his chest a decade earlier, he has dreamed the same dream of darkness rushing in, of breath failing, of everything he has hammered into order crumbling into dust. So he pursues the impossible with the same ferocity he once hurled at enemy fortresses. He pursues immortality. Alchemists from every corner of the new empire crowd his laboratories, grey-robed men carrying gourds of rare ore and scrolls thick with cryptic symbols. They speak of cinnabar, of jade powder, of crushed pearls mixed with dragon bone. They swear that transformation lies hidden inside metals the color of dawn. Court physicians caution restraint, but their voices are soft, while the murmurs of the magi are sweet and sure. The emperor listens to the promise that a shimmering crimson pill can seal his spirit to his flesh, that a radiant draught can send death itself stumbling blind. And because he is the first emperor, and because his word is iron, the furnaces never rest. Though Qin Shi Huang commands battalions like movable mountains, his own body begins to show hairline cracks, sleepless nights, constant travel, lingering wounds from battles long settled. Each leaves a weakness for poison to seep through, yet it is poison of his own choosing. At dawn, he swallows pellets distilled from quicksilver, the living metal Westerners will later call mercury. They taste bitter, metallic, strangely cold. Courtiers swallow their alarm and bow lower as he tips back a jade cup of liquid brilliance. At first, the shimmering fluid excites him. His pulse races as if he is sprinting again across conquered ridges. He believes this is proof the potion is working. Weeks become months. The emperor's eyes develop a faint tremor. His hands shake when reading edicts. He orders more pills, convinced that each new dose is a step closer to the realm of the undying. His tongue grows swollen and his voice thick. He blames spies for the tremors, ghosts of the defeated Zhao or Chu people whispering curses through palace beams. He doubles the guard, then doubles it again, yet still the shaking worsens. One autumn, he sets out on an eastern inspection tour, partly to inspire loyalty, partly to seek the legendary Isles of the Immortals said to rise from the ocean mist near modern Shandong. Coastal winds lash the imperial fleet, but the emperor stays on deck wrapped in sable, staring at whitecaps. He imagines robed sages stepping from cloud bridges bearing new elixirs, purer than his alchemist's attempts. When the waves surge too high, ministers beg him to rest in his cabin. He refuses. He will not appear frail to the heavens that watch. By the 3rd month of the journey, his gait has become uncertain. Mercury eats at his nervous system, loosens his joints, clouds his thoughts like silt stirring in clear water. But still, he consumes the red pills at sunrise, noon, and dusk. A reputed recluse named Shu Fu had once promised to sail east and return with an herb that stops aging. Years have passed, and no herb has come. The emperor's patience thins. His entourage presses deeper into coastal provinces, searching for temples said to conceal sacred mushrooms. Each village produces elders who bow, swear loyalty, and provide baskets of common toadstools. Furious, Qin Shi Huang has several officials flogged for presenting false remedies, yet swallows a tincture made from the mushrooms anyway, just in case. Late one humid night near present-day Pingyuan, thunder rolls over flat fields. Lightning flashes illuminate the emperor seated alone, poring over a green-glazed map of the empire. Servants wait in antechambers, ears straining for a call that never comes. Before dawn, a eunuch enters with an oil lamp and finds the ruler hunched forward, breathing in short, brittle gasps. His skin is papery white, lips flecked with a metallic glaze. He tries to rise, but his legs buckle. By the time the chief physician arrives, the emperor is shaking so violently the bed rattles. A mercury-laden draught is brought as remedy. He drinks, believing the spark of life inside the liquid will banish whatever demon claws at his spine. Instead, the convulsions intensify. Eyes once sharp enough to judge a general's traitorous wink now stray unfocused across shadowed beams. When dawn pinks the thatched roofs outside, the son of heaven slips into what seems a troubled sleep. Ministers kneel in a ring, terrified that a wrong whisper might summon blame. The hours creep by. He does not wake. Panic must be smothered. The empire cannot behead itself in daylight. Chancellor Li Si and Chief Eunuch Zhao Gao seal the room, scribble orders in the emperor's cumbersome jade seal, and announce he is merely resting from exhaustion. To disguise the sour smell of decay, they fill the royal carriage with crates of rotting fish, claiming the emperor enjoys the scent of his native river markets. Soldiers at each relay station receive sealed missives instructing them to maintain silence on pain of death. The cortege rumbles west along imperial highways the emperor himself commissioned, stone slabs still fresh with calligraphed milestones. Peasants bow as the dust passes, unaware they kneel before a corpse. At every stop, Li Si drafts proclamations, granting titles and levies, forging the seal over sheets of silk. A cart follows behind collecting the droppings of the fish cargo. No one wants the acrid scent trailing too far or too faint. By the time the procession rolls beneath the gates of Xianyang, the emperor's body is nearly unrecognizable. Rites are rushed in secret. The outer court is told he died suddenly of an illness on the journey home. Within 6 weeks, his favored son commits suicide in a web of forced letters and Zhao Gao's intrigue. Within a year, rebellion smolders. Within 4, the Qin dynasty collapses in a roar of uprising, undone not only by harsh laws, but by the emperor's empty throne. Yet Qin Shi Huang's preparations for afterlife remain intact. Outside the city walls, beneath a man-made hill, the size of a small mountain, lies his tomb, sealed tighter than any riddle. Contemporary writings describe a model of the empire laid out in miniature. Rivers of mercury flowing through bronze channels to mimic the Yangtze and the Yellow River, cross-cut by jade bridges. Crossbow traps wait for looters. Torches use whale, oil promised never to burn out. For over 2 millennia, nobody has pierced the earthen mound. Scientists who measure the soil still detect unusually high mercury levels leaching to the surface. The poison that slew the emperor may still guard him, gleaming silently in darkness. Modern scholars debate whether the quantity he ingested could alone kill him, or whether stress and existing illness hastened the damage. Physicians reading ancient formulas point out how cinnabar converts to mercury vapor when heated, seeping into lungs, blood, brain. Archaeologists examining skeletons at nearby workshops find spine deformities and limb numbness, evidence that craftsmen who handled liquid mercury suffered alongside their sovereign. In effect, half the court paid a price for one man's terror of dying. But numbers cannot erase the myth. To school children, the first emperor is the builder of walls and roads, the tyrant who burned books, the visionary who unified characters and weights. And always, he is the ruler who sought immortality so ferociously that he achieved its opposite. His clay army of thousands stands at attention forever, yet the man they protect could not survive a single lifetime. Tales told at dusk along the Wei River still imagine him wandering his underground palace, drinking from mercury streams, doomed to feel every sting of the toxin without ever achieving the release of true death. Listen for a moment in that twilight. Hush! Hear the clink of countless terracotta spears, the silent shuffle of clay souls across packed earth. Then, almost imperceptibly, hear the drip of unseen liquids sliding along copper trenches. An echo of restless ambition, still searching for a cure, even as centuries pass overhead. In that quiet, the lesson grows clear. To love life enough to cage it is to pierce it with one's own hand, and to trust alchemy over acceptance is to let poison write your epitaph. Breathe evenly now, softer than the drip in the dark. and let the weight of impermanence settle you towards sleep, where dreams last exactly as long as they are meant to, and no longer. The soft amber glow of oil lamps spills across the marble floors of the Lateran Palace, spreading a sleepy warmth through cavernous corridors lined with faded frescoes. Rome in the mid-10th century is a tangle of contradictions. Pilgrim chants rise beside alleyway brawls. Incense drifts over forums where goats graze among toppled columns. And the See of St. Peter has become less a beacon of holiness than a prize in a feud among noble clans. Outside the palace gates, the Tiber murmurs beneath its worn bridges. Inside, velvet curtains absorb the hush of scheming bishops and restless guards. In these high-ceilinged rooms lives Octavianus, scion of the powerful Crescenti family, crowned supreme pontiff at the astounding age of 18. The world will remember him as Pope John XII. But to many contemporaries, he is simply the wild boy who swapped a youth of hawking and horse racing for the keys of heaven. Youth, however, does not dissolve when the fish ring slides onto his finger. It merely gains marble hallways for playgrounds. Records describe dice, games tossed across altar cloths, hunting parties that melt into night-long banquets, a retinue of companions more suited to taverns than to cathedrals. Servants whisper that he calls on Venus more often than on the Virgin, that monks are dispatched to fetch rare wines while liturgies wait. The papal treasury shrinks, yet torchlight feasts grow brighter. Once, he rides through the city streets in full armor, a gilded helmet flashing under the moon, determined to settle a private quarrel with a rival noble, as though still a reckless teenager jousting for bravado. Diplomats from distant courts arrive seeking solemn blessing. They find a bronze-skinned youth lounging beneath silk canopies, a goblet balanced on one knee, a falcon perched on the other. He greets them with lazy charm, promises alliances, forgets them by dawn. Chroniclers, equal parts shocked and fascinated, jot notes in cautious Latin. They catalogue rumours that the Pope turned the Lateran into a brothel, that coins meant for pilgrim hospitals pay for velvet drapes, that an altar once consecrated by saints now hosts dice and curses till sunrise. Gossip travels faster than parchment. By the time it reaches German abbeys, the tales have fermented into legend, every transgression amplified like a peal of thunder rolling down the Alps. Yet power in Rome never rests on indulgence alone. John is cunning. When rival lords threaten, he appeals to King Otto of Germany for military support, promising imperial coronation in return. Otto marches south, drives away Roman factions, receives a crown beneath the great dome of St. Peter's, then lingers to reform the papal court. But reform cannot outpace desire. The moment the German retinue departs for the north, John ushers friends back through side doors, uncorks casks, and laughter again echoes where Gregorian psalms once floated. Otto hears of the relapse and summons a synod to depose the Pope for simony, perjury, and sins too explicit for parchment. John flees to Tivoli, rallies local militias, and retakes Rome while Otto is still crossing the Apennines, a chaos of swords flaring under candle smoke. The holy city flips allegiance like a coin, then flips again, the Tiber reflecting whichever banner hangs closest to its banks. By late spring of 964, exhaustion nibbles at John's edges. He is barely 25, but late-night feasts have blurred into early morning headaches, and every satchel that arrives from family estates demands new favors. Rome itself seems to tilt beneath the hot breath of June. Officials drum on account ledgers. Bishops mutter darkly about divine patience wearing thin. John shrugs, slips out of council meetings, and rides toward the Aventine, where a villa loaned by a wealthy widow promises seclusion. The slope above the Circus Maximus is alive with churring crickets and honeysuckle perfume. Marble nymphs gaze from garden fountains. Olive leaves flicker silver in moonlight. Here he escapes the iron gaze of curial clerks and the thunder of northern kings. One night at the villa, he welcomes a married woman whose husband is rumoured to be travelling on trade north of the Apennines. No record preserves her name for certain. Some call her Stefania, some Reingarda, only that she arrives veiled, escorted by a single lantern. Inside, Couches are strewn with patterned cushions. A table waits under platters of dates and figs. A mild breeze drifts through open shutters, carrying the scent of distant fires baking flatbread. Servants retreat behind carved doors. The candles burn lower, wicks curling like black question marks. At some quiet hour, the Pope begins to breathe harder. Perhaps he reaches for the goblet of sweet wine at his elbow. Perhaps he laughs at a whispered jest. A dull ache blooms in his skull, radiates to the nape of his neck. He tries to rise, but the room tilts. The woman calls for help, candlelight streaking across plaster as feet pound along mosaic floors. By the time guards push open the chamber, Pope John lies half-clothed on embroidered cushions, lips blue, right hand clutching his chest. A physician kneels, fingers searching beneath clammy skin. The pulse jerks, falters, slips away. Some say it is a stroke, sudden and merciless. Others hint the husband has returned early, blade glinting once before vanishing into summer darkness. The tidiest annals choose apoplexy and hurriedly slide the scene behind Latin etiquette. But the gossip that once scurried through taverns now sprouts wings. Within days, market sellers cry that the Pope was struck dead in mortal sin. Monks in hillside cloisters shake their tonsured heads at the cautionary tale, writing itself before their eyes. Curia cardinals gather in silence. Rome trembles with uncertainty, for a vacant throne tips the delicate balance between German emperors and Roman nobles. Yet for many city dwellers, a strange hush blankets the usual morning bustle. Bakers knead dough a fraction slower, as though measuring words among themselves. High above, bells toll a measured dirge that floats over the river and settles in vineyards, and even wine-pickers pause to listen. Death always softens noise, even when it arrives clothed in scandal. Within the palace chambers, servants strip bed linen, burn scented resins, and shut latticed windows against curious stares. The woman said to be with John vanishes into the labyrinth of alleys or into legend's unlit corners. Chroniclers note her only as a lady and then avert their pens. Scribes work through midday, drafting announcements that frame the Pope's demise as a visitation of sudden illness, an admonition of frailty shared by all mortals, no matter how high their station. They avoid mention of dice or falcons or racing horses. They do not speak of lovers. Paper shields memory, but rumour slips through cracks like dawn light. When Otto returns months later, Rome has already elected another pontiff, Leo VIII, hoping imperial favour will anchor the city. Yet the stain of John's reign proves harder to wash away than spilled wine on white marble. Moralists cite him as proof that youth and power breed corruption when untethered from discipline. Historians debate how many scandals he truly committed versus those pinned to him by enemies. Still, his name lingers in sermons warning of unchecked appetite, in comedies where a drunken priest gambles at the altar, in footnotes cataloguing the lowest ebbs of papal history. The Church will face darker crises in centuries to come, but the story of John Thfund remains a convenient lantern waved toward future popes. Feast if you must, but remember the body's fragile fuse. Imagine now, Rome settling into evening once more. The sun's last blush paints terracotta rooftops. Pigeons settle along crumbling aqueducts, and the domes of basilicas glow faint gold. Somewhere on the Aventine, vines still curl around weathered columns, and moths drift through abandoned courtyards, where laughter once chased away responsibility. If you stand in that hush, you may hear the river sighing, carrying downstream a faint echo of dice clacking on marble, a gasp of surprise, and the thick quiet that follows a heart suddenly still. The city forgets many things, yet it remembers, echoes. And sometimes those echoes call us gently to contemplate how swiftly indulgence becomes epitaph. Allow the murmur of the Tiber to blend with your own breath, slow and rhythmic. Let the lanterns in these ancient corridors fade to a soft orange blur behind your eyelids. Hear the distant bell, steady as a heartbeat, tolling the same message it told that humid night. Power flickers, flesh crumbles, but stories endure, drifting like fireflies above summer gardens, bright for a moment, then gone. A haze of late summer heat hangs over the royal estate at Tatoi just outside Athens, turning the gardens into a wavering mirage. Cicadas rasp from the pines, they're endless, chant rising and falling like the breath of a sleepy giant. In one shaded walkway wanders King Alexander of Greece, 27 years old, lean, anxious, and always half aware that the crown weighs more than it shines. He inherited it only because Europe's great powers decided his father, Constantine, was inconvenient. They exiled the seasoned monarch and installed the young prince on a throne he never sought, telling him to sit still and look regal while older men steered policy. In public, Alexander smiles and waves. In private, he walks these gardens with a single companion who never questions his right to be here, a wiry yellow and white terrier named Fritz. This late afternoon in October 1920 carries a dusty calm. Beyond the iron railings, tremors of war still tug at Greece's borders. Troops in Anatolia, uneasy treaties in the Balkans, but inside the estate, the only skirmish is between Fritz and a troop of half-tame Barbary macaques that roost in the olive trees. A gamekeeper keeps them as curiosities, bragging that they lend an exotic note to royal picnics. Usually they chatter, steal figs, and scatter when servants clap. Today, two males linger on a path lined with oleander, tails twitching. They eye Fritz. Fritz eyes them back. Alexander, engrossed in thought, notices too late. The dog lunges first, emitting a bark too sharp for the sleepy air. The larger macaque, a sinewy creature with shaggy brown fur, springs down, bares yellow teeth, and screeches so loudly it seems to shred the quiet sky. Alexander calls Fritz, but the second monkey, smaller yet quicker, darts behind and snaps at the terrier's flank. Dog yelps, monkey squeals, dust explodes. Instinct overrides decorum. The king stoops, grabs a stick fallen from the olive grove, and moves to pry opponents apart. He manages one swipe that sends the smaller macaque scrambling up a branch, but the larger one, height now level with Alexander's knee, wheels and sinks its teeth into the royal calf. Pain flashes hot and sudden. Alexander gasps, swats again, and the animal releases only to bite at his thigh. A gardener arrives, hurls a stone that thumps harmlessly against dirt. Another servant appears with a rake. The monkeys retreat, shrieking victory from leafy parapets. Fritz limps behind Alexander, tail low, while crimson blotches spread across light trousers. The whole skirmish lasts less than a minute, not long enough for palace guards to reach the scene, yet long enough for bacteria older than dynasties to slip beneath the king's skin. Inside, attendants clean the punctures with carbolic and wrap them in gauze. The wounds look shallow, almost tidy. Alexander laughs it off, embarrassed at how quickly anger overcame reason. Physician Kumiotis prescribes rest, a tincture of iodine, and a bandage change tomorrow. No one suggests anti-serum. Pasteur's lessons have trickled only slowly into Greek protocol. And besides, monkey bites seem trivial compared to bullet wounds. That night, Alexander dines alone at a small table. Ministers run the government. London advises policy. Paris oversees finances. He eats roast chicken, strokes Fritz with his good leg, and rereads a letter from Aspasia Manos, the commoner. He married for love, not politics. She waits in quiet exile because the court refuses to accept a union unsanctioned by royal decree. The king's thigh throbs in time with his heart. 2 days later, the flesh around the bites swells crimson, warm as a stove tile. Stiffness invades the knee. Fever follows, prickling first at the hairline, then filling his skull with heavy clouds. A surgeon drains pus and prescribes quinine, but gangrene spreads its green-black stain faster than scalpels can keep pace. By the 5th day, red streaks climb toward the groin like poisonous vines searching for the sun. Alexander drifts between delirium and lucidity, dreaming of salty wind on naval decks, of carefree drives along Phaleron Bay before politics exiled his father and imprisoned his choices. Each time he wakes, he asks for Aspasia. each time courtiers stall, fearing scandal should she rush to his bedside. When at last they relent, she arrives to find him shivering, lips split with thirst, eyes bright with fever's eerie clarity. Bacteremia becomes septicemia. Infection, having devoured muscle, now swims the bloodstream, battering organs like storm waves battering a cliff that has already begun to crumble. Nurses fan him, priests whisper prayers, and outside the palace gates, Greeks argue whether a king installed by foreigners can ever truly be Greece's own. On 25th of October 1920, a full 23 days after a dog and 2 monkeys fought over royal dignity, Alexander's breathing slows to a ragged whisper, then slips into silence. His doctors list the cause as blood poisoning from an infected animal. Bite. Newspapers scramble. A king felled not by assassin's rifle, not by battlefield charge, but by creatures smaller than a toddler. The London Times tries gentility, writing of a painful accident. French papers marvel at the absurdity, while Athens presses print caricatures of politicians in monkey masks tugging at a crown. Statesmen who once viewed Alexander as a placeholder now dig through family trees to decide which exiled relative should return. Within a month, Constantine the Firm is back on the throne, political tides reverse, and Greece's military ventures in Asia Minor shift toward catastrophe. Some historians will claim that Greece's defeat at Smyrna began with the monkey bite that toppled its young king. Aspasia mourns quietly, her marriage posthumously recognized, so that their unborn child can claim a sliver of legitimacy. Fritz lives out his days somewhere on the estate, occasionally barking at shadows along the rose hedge. The surviving macaques vanish. Some say shipped to a menagerie in Cairo. Others whisper darker fates. But legends persist that their descendants still haunt northern Attica, smaller, warier, but forever tied by blood to the kingdom they changed without understanding. Walk those gardens today, and olive leaves still shift in the breeze. Paths remain shaded, gravel crunches under every step, and the air smells of pine, dust, and sea. A few miles distant, guides will point to a marble bench and tell the story, voices low so as not to wake ghosts. Visitors smile at the absurdity, snap photographs, and move on. Yet a few linger, imagining that brief blur of fur and teeth, the startled bark, the stick raised in royal hand, the fateful sting. They notice how quiet the place becomes when cicadas pause mid-song, as if history itself draws a breath, remembering the moment when an empire's trajectory pivoted on jaws smaller than a child's fist. Perhaps the deeper moral lies not in the randomness of danger, but in how the humblest accident can unmake decisions steered by grand councils. Monarchs plan campaigns, microbes plan nothing. One dog defends its master, 2 monkeys defend their pride, and over decades maps redraw themselves. Listening closely beneath the buzzing of insects, one might hear the faint echo of a crown striking the gravel, the slip of gauze against reddening skin, the sigh of a young ruler who learned too late that even a king's flesh yields to tiny teeth and older laws of decay. The chill that seeps through the limestone towers of Pamplona in January feels less like weather and more like an omen, a thin, needling reminder that winter exposes everything, from bare branches to hidden sins. In the royal apartments of the Citadel, King Charles II of Navarre lies restless under layers of embroidered blankets, listening to wind-rattle shutters and distant bells toll Compline. He is 54 and has carried the epithet le mauvais, the bad, for so long that even servants whisper it with a twisted sort of respect. Charles is famous across Christendom for plotting assassination in one breath and quoting the Psalms in the next, for cosseting French nobles at his table while secretly bribing their enemies before dawn. He has survived poisonings, uprisings, even personal imprisonment by the French king, emerging each time with a smile like a closed blade. Yet all those triumphs mean little now, because the enemy coiled against his heart is invisible, disease that weakens his muscles, hollows his cheeks, and leaves him so cold that even 5 hearths cannot warm him. Physicians debate the nature of his affliction. Some mutter degenerative palsy, others putrefaction of the blood. Their treatments sound more like culinary experiments than medicine. Syrup of ground pearls, powdered emeralds sprinkled on egg yolk, leeching, bleeding, then leeching again. None of it works. Fever spikes, then ebbs into chills that make the monarch's teeth knock like castanets. Charles, who once threatened to drown a bishop for preaching temperance, now shivers beneath fur cloaks and dreams of fireplaces. On Epiphany Eve, a new remedies master arrives, a Catalan famed for audacious cures. He peers at the king's pallor, nods gravely, and prescribes warmth, extreme warmth. His plan is simple in outline, terrifying in detail. Wrap the king head to toe in linens soaked with eau de vie, distilled brandy of high proof. Then stitch the layers tight so the spirit may draw out the chill humours, while sealing in vital heat. Court apothecaries raise eyebrows, but dare not refuse. They steep long cloths in barrels of liquor until the corridors smell like a tavern at harvest festival. Then, in a chamber lit by a single taper, attendants wind the strips around Charles's body, mummifying him from ankles to throat. Each bandage oozes clear spirit that might as well be lamp oil. The king, groggy with laudanum, murmurs prayers, or curses, nobody is sure. He dozes amid the hiss of evaporating alcohol as the final stitches tug the wrappings tight. Hours pass. Midnight nears. The taper guttering by the bedside spits and carves wild shadows across stone walls. A young serving girl named Colomba, no more than 16, steps forward with a small scissors to snip the final thread holding the last 2 bandage ends. Her hands tremble, not from fear, but from cold. Drafts swirl under the iron-banded door. She brings the candle closer to see the knot. A thin tongue of flame wavers, leans and barely kisses the brandy-damp cloth. Just a breath of contact. At first, there is only a whispering whoosh, like wind rushing through dry reeds. Then orange light flares along the bandage seam. The linen ignites instantly, alcohol vapor blooming fire in every loose crease. Colomba yelps and drops the scissors. The taper rolls beneath the bed. Charles's eyes snap open, pupils reflecting. A widening corona of flame that races up his torso, across his chest, toward his beard. He tries to sit up, but the stitches bind him fast. A muffled scream, half rage, half terror, echoes down the corridor before smoke chokes it off. Servants fling open doors. Frigid air meets the inferno in a crackling surge. One guard dumps a pitcher of snowmelt that hisses to steam. Another sweeps a tapestry off the wall to smother flames, slapping wildly at the king's writhing form, but cloth sticks to cloth, fusing charred linen to blistering flesh. The stench of burning wool and human hair clouds the chamber. Within, moments the fire is out, yet the damage is done. Charles lies still, eyes wide, lips parted as though about to dictate one more intrigue, but no breath stirs. His skin is mottled red and black beneath ragged strips of smouldering bandage. Word of the catastrophe spreads through the castle like sparks on dry straw. By matins, the citizens of Pamplona whisper the news in marketplaces. The bad king burned, in his own sheets. Some say it was divine justice at last. Others claim assassins swapped water for brandy. Chronicles penned weeks later, careful to maintain decorum, record only that His Majesty was accidentally consumed by flame while receiving a restorative therapy. They do not mention the servant girl's candle, nor her screams echoing. Down icy halls, Colomba, guilt coiled tighter than any bandage, flees before dawn, vanishing into Navarra's snow-flecked hills. Politically, the king's death cracks open fault lines he himself spent decades prying apart. The crowns of Navarre and France jostle over inheritance, dukes barter loyalty for provinces, and peasants pay new-forged taxes levelling charred greed upon humble fields. Yet among common folk, the tale becomes fable faster than newsprint can dry. Children dare each other to retell it at bonfires. how a king so steeped in treachery fermented into living torch. In taverns, old men tap ash from pipes, nod and mutter. The moral: plot long enough and fire finds you in your bed. Behind monastery walls, scholars debate whether the tragedy was providence or misfortune. Chemists note that weeping bandages of alcohol turn flesh into wick. Physicians quietly remove brandy wraps from their repertoire. Yet, like smoke mingling with dust, the story lingers. A caution against cures more lethal than illness, against power unmoored from humility. In airy palaces far from Spain, nobles add a final irony, that Charles requested brandy for warmth, and brandy delivered heat in lethal abundance. Today, in Pamplona's historic quarter, a small plaque near the Citadel Gate bears the king's Latin epitaph. Tour groups pass it by, more interested in cafes serving hot chocolate. But if one lingers at dusk, after the bells of San Saturnino toll vespers, there comes a moment when wind funnels down the narrow lane, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke. Some imaginations swear the smell is tinged with something sharper, distilled, spirit-igniting memory. Close your eyes then, and you might glimpse, in the dark theatre of a dozing mind, a candle tilting toward a white-bound figure, a flash of orange, and the fleeting lesson that follows like a shadow. The line between remedy and ruin is no thicker than a wick. King Edmund II of England, the Privy. Assassin. Cold drizzle needles the thatch roofs of Oxfordshire in late November 1016, soaking. Ruts in the muddy lanes and turning every hearth fire into a column of sweet wood smoke. Less than a generation after Viking longships first knifed up the Thames, England is still a mosaic of bruised loyalties. Saxon thanes, Danish invaders, and Norman opportunists all barter oaths the way farmers trade lambs on market day. Yet in the fortified manor at Oxnead, one man holds the battered mosaic together, a 26-year-old king known to chroniclers as Edmund Ironside. He earned that name in the summer's heat, when he rallied broken thirds again and again to strike at Nut the Dane, hammering across Wiltshire's fields in a rearguard that shocked both friend and foe. His sword strokes were so fierce that captured Vikings muttered of a warrior forged from the same iron as his mail. But Ironside's crown, newly forged, still gleams with stress fractures. The Witan Council argues in whispers. Earls count how many spears remain unbroken. And Knut prowls Kentish marshes, like a wolf sniffing wounded prey. For now, diplomacy has stitched a frail seam. The kingdom is split, the Thames drawn as an invisible boundary. Edmund rules Wessex and English Mercia. Knut claims the Danelaw and Northumbria. Both monarchs pretend the arrangement will hold. In reality, each sharpens blades beneath embroidered banners, awaiting winter's lull to strike once more. Inside, Oxnead's timber hall, Edmund walks like a caged bear. His shoulders ache with old bruises. Half-healed gashes tug whenever he lifts a drinking horn. Advisors urge caution until reinforcements gather. The king growls, for patience has never been his ally. When night mist curls over the yard, he orders extra sentries, lashes torches to posts, then retreats to a private chamber partitioned from the main hall by oak planks. There, a narrow door opens onto a small wooden privy that juts beyond the palisade, an outhouse balanced above a pit carved into chalky soil. The king insists on privacy even in war. No guard stands inside this vestibule. Custom dictates that a man should relieve himself without witnesses, even if he wears a crown. In calmer reigns the practice seems harmless. Tonight it will prove fatal. Somewhere among the gnarled elm roots, beneath the privy pit crouches a figure no bigger than a kitchen boy. Chroniclers never record his name, only that he answers to Edmund's stepbrother, Edric Streona. Edric the Grasper, a Mercian ealdorman famed for swapping allegiance whenever silver rings glitter brighter on another lord's finger. Days earlier, Edric visited the Danish camp under flag of truce, then returned to Oxfordshire claiming loyalty. The king accepted him back, though many a thane spat on the ground at the sight of Streona's badge. The assassin waits in a hole dug well below the seat's opening, dank fumes clinging to his tunic. He is patient, clutching a short spear whose head has been filed into a cruel leaf shape. Overhead, rainwater drips between floorboards, cold as dread. When footsteps creak upon the privy planks, the killer draws a slow breath. Edmund settles onto the seat, a simple wooden slab with an oval cut. For one moment, war and succession vanish, replaced by the vulnerable ordinariness of a man obeying nature. The assassin grips the spear shaft, braces feet against slick chalk, and thrusts. The point tears upward through rotting straw and night soil, punching cleanly into flesh tender as unbaked dough. The king's gasp is half-formed, more surprise than pain. A second thrust follows, angling higher. Wound blooms crimson across pale thighs. Above, a stool leg cracks as Edmund springs up, overturning the chamber pot stand. Metal rings the planks. He staggers back through the narrow doorway, clutching below his belt where warm blood soaks wool. A guard, hearing the crash, rushes forward and sees the monarch sagging against the wall, face chalk white under torch shadow. Treacherous stab. Edmund hisses, words slurred by shock. Fetch the leech. He is carried to his bed on a door, plank. Physicians slice away wet garments, pressing linen pads against punctures too deep to staunch. Entrails leak where no needle can reach. They brew hot wine with herbs that promise numbness, but every swallow is met with a wince. In delirium, Edmund imagines horses charging at Ashington again, feels the weight of kite shields buckling under his arm. He mutters to long-dead comrades, Alfred, Ethelred, even his father Swain. Through damp lashes he sees Edric kneeling bedside, eyes shining with false pity. The king tries to lift an arm to accuse the snake, but strength has ebbed, away like tide-leaving river mud, streaked and lifeless. At dawn, a hush settles over the manor. Servants set aside bread needed for the royal breakfast. Outside, Cnut's spies count campfires and note the unusual stillness. Before noon, chancellors announce that Edmund Ironside, Hammer of Danes, has perished from wounds sustained in private circumstances. The official roll lists natural causes, a phrase as colourless as frost, and no scroll mentions spears hidden beneath privy pits. But rumour gallops faster than parchment. Within a week, ballads spread from alehouse, hearths to abbey cloisters, describing the killer lurking in dung and the king skewered in his most vulnerable posture. The tale grows with each retelling. Some say the weapon was poisoned. Others claim the assassin fled through an underground tunnel, emerging hours later beside Danish tents to claim payment. A monk in Canterbury writes that judgment found a monarch who sought peace, yet trusted traitors. Edric Striona's reward is swift. At Christmas, now King Cnut orders him beheaded for past treacheries. His corpse is thrown over London's north wall, devoured by wolves during a snowfall. Thus, the chain of betrayal tightens upon itself, each link snapping back at the hand that forged it. Edmund receives burial beside his grandfather Edgar in Glastonbury Abbey. Monks carve a stone effigy of stern brow and shield, omitting the grisly manner of death, yet whispers remain louder than carved epitaphs. Centuries on, when travellers kneel before the tomb, some claim they hear distant splashes, as if water drips into a dark pit, even in this holy nave. Guides glance away, unwilling, to say the words privy and king in the same breath beneath stained glass saints. Modern historians debate the plausibility of the assassination tale. Certain annals attribute Edmund's death to lingering war wounds or a burst blood vessel. Archaeologists, lacking a preserved corpse, can prove nothing. But the story's endurance suggests a potent lesson. No armour can shield a monarch from the ordinary vulnerabilities of flesh. No title spares a man from schemes hatched in shadow. It is the propensity for betrayal, rather than the spear itself, that pierces power. Stand, if you wish, at Glastonbury on a grey December morning. Fog drifts across moss-laden stones, and the abbey ruins echo the slow drip of condensed mist. Imagine the young king who fought battles back to back until his muscles burned, who bore the weight of a fractured kingdom on shoulders still growing into manhood. Then picture how a single hidden thrust transformed thunderous courage into a caution whispered at latrine trenches for generations. Keep your enemies at arm's length, and your privy better guarded than your treasury. At last, release the image and let the fog fold over it. Feel the cold settle against your skin like history's quiet hand, reminding ruler and wanderer alike that vigilance must never sleep, for danger may rise from the lowest places, silent and unseen, at the very moment we lay down our defences and turn away. The tides of the English Channel roll against the Norman coast in slow, muffled sighs, white foam dissolving into grey shingle, while gulls wheel above like bits of parchment caught in salt-stained wind. In early December of 1135, at the Royal Hunting Lodge of Lyon-la-Forêt, King Henry I of England wakes before dawn, to the familiar ache of age easing along his spine. He is 67, older than any English monarch before him, and, though his beard has frosted to snowy strands, his appetite remains that of a soldier fresh from campaign. Outside, frost feathers every branch. Inside, crackling firewood perfumes the chamber with cedar and smoke. Courtiers stir at his rising and hurry to prepare what the king calls simply, "my little breakfast." Little, to Henry, is a relative measure. He is renowned for two hungers: a hunger for order, coins standardized across his realm, judges riding dusty circuits to tame lawless shires, and a hunger for lampreys, those sinuous, jawless fish whose round, tooth-ringed mouths latch to river stones. Lampreys are to him what nectar is to the gods, both delicacy and delight. Chroniclers note he consumed them against all advice, for physicians whispered that their oily flesh clings to the gut like wet clay to a potter's wheel, slowing the humours and thickening the blood. This December morning, servants carry a silver dish, domed and steaming, into the king's private hall. When the lid lifts, curls of aromatic steam escape. Garlic, wine, a hint of bay. Nestled within are 6 roasted lampreys, glistening dark and coiled as though still alive. Henry's eyes gleam with the mischief of a boy caught raiding an orchard. He waves away the steward's timid protest that the royal physician recommended broth only. "Warm broth is for monks," he chuckles, carving the first lamprey with a knife hilted in walrus ivory. 1 eel, 2, then a third, its flesh flaking under buttery sauce. The steward pales but refills the king's goblet with crisp white wine. From Anjou, trusting to Providence rather than protest. Outside the tall windows, dawn gilds frost crystals on the lawn. Henry, licking his fingers, reminisces aloud about the hunting expedition planned for noon. Boarhounds eager, crossbow, strings waxed. He finishes the meal with a wedge of spice pear tart, then rises, belting a cloak trimmed in wolf fur. "There's vigour yet in these bones," he says, slapping his thigh. The vigour falters by late afternoon. Riding through dark fir stands, Henry feels a knotty churn beneath his ribs. Scents of pine and damp earth, once bracing, now clot in his throat like wool. He signals the master huntsman to call back the hounds. Back at the lodge, warmth that earlier promised comfort now stings like nettles on his flushed skin. He sinks into a carved oak chair beside the hearth as a physician named Gilbert de Clare kneels, fingertips pressed to the king's wrist. The pulse, steady years ago, judders like a drum struck off beat. Gilbert asks what was eaten. When he hears the answer, his shoulders sag. "Lampreys again," he murmurs, as if naming an old adversary. Henry's stomach rebels through the evening. Draped tapestries cannot muffle wretches echoing along stone corridors. At first he cracks jokes, "Better the fish swim in me than I in the sea." But by midnight humour deserts him. Fever beads on his brow. Limbs cramp. Remedies swirl, powdered anise, peppermint syrup, even a quick bloodletting to release warm corruption. None avail. Lamprey oil seems to slick every organ, sealing pain inside. By dawn, his vision dims. He mistakes his chaplain's face for that of his son William, drowned 25 years earlier in the wreck of the White Ship. A memory that still gouges sorrow through his hardened shell. He whispers for his daughter Matilda, Empress Maud, but she is months of travel away. Instead, Robert of Gloucester, his illegitimate son and staunch ally, kneels and clasps the king's slackening hand. Henry tries to speak of succession, of oaths sworn by barons to accept Matilda as queen, yet the words melt to sighs. Gilbert urges opiate-soaked cloth between Henry's lips. The king turns his head away, insisting he remain lucid to the end. He dies near midnight on 1st December, breath rattling like pebbles rolled by a tide. A feast of lampreys, against advice, has undone a reign of 35 years. News gallops from Lyon-la-Forêt over frost-slick roads, crosses the Channel on salt-sprayed cogs, and reaches Westminster by Christmas. Barons murmur, weighing promises against ambition. Many resent the idea of bowing to a woman, even one bred among emperors. When Matilda lands in Normandy to claim the throne, her cousin, Stephen of Blois, has already slipped across to London, promising stability, distributing silver, securing a swift coronation. Thus begins the anarchy, nearly 2 decades of civil war. Sieges in rain-soaked castles, burned wheat fields, whole villages reduced to ashes. Chroniclers will lament, Christ and his saints slept, as lawlessness proliferates. All rooted, many will say, in a king's belligerent palate. In the generations that follow, lampreys acquire an uneasy glamour in English cuisine. Monarchs still request lamprey pie at Christmas, yet etiquette books advise moderation, citing the lamentable example of King Henry I. Physicians list the eel among hot and moist foods to be sparingly indulged, lest digestion rebel. But legends prove stickier than diet tracts. Children in Oxfordshire rhyme verses about Harry and the slippery fish, half cautionary, tale, half bedtime riddle. Today, scholars debate whether lampreys alone killed the king. Modern medicine suggests acute gastroenteritis, perhaps aggravated by winterborne bacteria, compounded by blood pressure already weighted with age. Yet historians note how neatly the story folds. A ruler famed for administrative precision, felled by gluttony. Order, toppled by indulgence. The moral glistens as clearly as lamprey skin under torchlight. Stand on a cold pier at Rouen near where Henry's body was embalmed. Guts buried on Norman soil. Heart and bones ferried to Reading. Abbey, sea air tastes metallic. Gulls scream against pewter clouds. Imagine the coffin rocking on the swell, planks creaking like jaws. The ship's cook, peeling onions for crew supper, pauses to stare at the unwaking king and wonders if onions too will one day gain a cautionary tail. The abbey is ruins now, grass tufting between chalk foundations, but some nights locals swear a briny scent drifts inland on fog, as though invisible eels still swim through history, seeking the man who could not resist them. Close your eyes there and hear surf in the distance. Let its hush remind you that appetites, be they for power or peculiar delicacies, often end where all stories converge. In silence, amid echoes of choices once savoured, now folded into the dark. The siege lines curl around Roxburgh Castle like a belt of smouldering thorn, each watchfire a red eye glaring through the damp Scottish dusk. It is July 1460, and the fields along the River Tweed already stink of mud, horse sweat, and half-spent gunpowder. From a slight rise beyond the outer ditch, King James II of Scotland surveys the English-held fortress, chin lifted, cloak whipping, against his calves whenever the coastal wind lurches inland. At 29, he carries himself with the eagerness of a man still tasting the first rush of rule. Even though he has worn the crown since childhood, even though politics at Edinburgh have calcified into their own maze of traps. Here, on campaign, life feels simpler. A wall, an enemy, a goal carved in stone. What stirs his blood more than catapults or scaling ladders are the newest gifts of war. Wrought iron bombards, monstrous as altar tables, each barrel hooped with thick staves, each mouth gaping toward the sky like a dragon hungry for prayers. James has become almost evangelical about artillery. He pores over sketches, asks smiths how to anneal iron with fewer cracks, even invites Flemish gunners to dine, at his table so he can question them between bites of venison. When he arrived at Roxburgh last week, he made certain his pet culverin, beautifully nicknamed the Lion for a roaring lion's head carved at its breech, occupied the forward battery facing the castle's southwest tower. The king plans to demonstrate its might and, by extension, the modern strength of Scotland. Rain spatters canvas as dawn breaks on the 6th day of bombardment. Courtiers still yawning in their tents jolt awake when the Lion thunders for the first time, expelling a stone ball big enough to buckle a church door. The projectile strikes the outer wall with a dull crunch of shattered masonry. James, nearby on horseback, claps gloved hands in delight. "Again," he calls, grinning toward the master gunner, a weather-creased man named John of Utrecht. John bows stiffly, begins swabbing the bore, and pours in new powder, a coarse black blend laced with pine charcoal. The king dismounts, boots squelching, and strides closer than protocol advises. He asks questions: powder grain size, fuse length, angle of elevation. John answers, yet his eyes dart to the clouds. Moisture does strange things to fuses. A third round cracks from the gun, louder and slightly off-pitch, as though the culverin coughs instead of singing. Shards of stone leap from Roxburgh's rampart. Servants cheer, archers pound arrow tips against shields. The king laughs, claps a lieutenant's shoulder, and vaults onto the earthwork itself to see better. Wind streaks his dark hair. Gunsmoke funnels past his face in oily ribbons that sting the throat with sulphur. John signals the crew to drive the swab deeper, tamp the powder harder. Damp flecks of charcoal cling to wool sleeves, to whiskers, to the very air. No one knows the barrel has already hairlined from thermal shock. By now, a score of onlookers cluster near the Lion, young noble pages hoping for stories, pikemen easing, muscles cramped from midnight watch, and a royal clerk tasked with keeping a tally of every shot. They stand where no man should, within arc of iron doom, because their king stands there too, radiating excitement, dangerously infectious. John attempts a subtle wave to clear them back. Few notice, fewer obey. James beckons for his cousin, the Earl of Angus, pointing out breach lines forming along the fort's curtain wall, explaining how artillery will rewrite the fortunes of sieges. Angus nods, but glances uneasily at the gun's sweating barrel. Powder, wadding, stone ball. The cycle repeats. John drives the rammer home and steps aside. A gunner touches the linstock's glowing match to the vent. The spark hisses. For the briefest instant, everyone holds breath, expecting thunder. Instead comes a sound like heavy fabric ripping. The powder flash misfires. Grey smoke burps from the vent, but the culverin does not recoil. John swears, rushes forward, and signals for water to cool the chamber, then reload. Time seems elastic, too slow and too fast. James, dissatisfied, leans over the railing of the earthwork, voice carrying above drizzle. "Let her roar, man. Scotland." Watches. John fumbles with the priming horn, taps fresh powder down the vent, packs a touch more into the breech. Inside the barrel, heat and moisture conspire, hiding a smoulder that never fully extinguished from the misfire. When the rammer shoves wadding forward, that lingering ember meets fresh black grains. The Lion roars, but inward. An eruption bursts from the breach like the opening of hell's door. Iron hoops shear apart, spiraling into jagged petals. The barrel fractures mid-length. The Lion's head muzzle flips skyward, vomits molten shards, then cartwheels into the mud. A shockwave slams into surrounding men, flinging some flat, splattering others with fragments glowing orange. One piece, fist-sized, strikes King James at the inside of his left thigh, shattering femur and tearing through arteries in the blink it takes to gasp. A sound escapes him strangely small, less than a shout, more like disbelief given breath. He stumbles backward off the mound, collapsing onto churned clay. Blood pulses across his plaid hose, hot against the cold rain, pooling so swiftly that straw placed beneath his hip turns crimson within seconds. Angus drops beside him, attempts to stanch the flow with a kerchief already soaked. The clerk staggers, staring at a shard lodged in his own shoulder, mouth shaping prayers without voice. Gunners rush forward, then freeze, some howling that the cannon is cursed, that English devils hexed the iron. John of Utrecht kneels by the wreckage, hands burned, beard singed, muttering that he tamped too soon, as if repetition might rewind time. The king's eyes flicker skyward, rain splattering his pupils. He murmurs something none can decipher, perhaps a calculation of breach width, perhaps his wife Mary's name. Another convulsion arches his spine, then slackness settles, as if every muscle dissolves at once. The royal surgeons arrive breathless, bare wooden boxes rattling with grisly tools. One glance tells them the truth. Leg nearly severed, artery ruptured, blood pressure plummeted beyond recall. They produce a cautery iron heated in a brazier, but the last spark of life leaves before. Iron meets flesh. All around, camp noises fade into stunned hush. Rain persists, indifferent. That night, Roxburgh's defenders spy torches lowering the Scottish royal standard to half-mast. They do not cheer. War recognizes tragedy's neutral language. Inside the Scottish camp, nobles gather in dim tents, faces drawn. Queen Mary is 40 miles away at Jedburgh. A rider gallops through sleet to summon her, cloak snapping like black wings. She will arrive to find her husband laid out beneath sail canvas, thigh a ruin no cloak can hide. Within days, the Scottish Council proclaims the king's 6-year-old son as James III. But the boy's minority invites factions the way spilled ale invites flies. Border lords eye old feuds, royal uncles measure crown weight. The siege of Roxburgh continues, fueled less by strategy than vengeance, and in August the castle finally surrenders. Victorious soldiers rename the citadel James's Castle, a tribute half honour, half grim joke about the cannon that tore their king apart. Historians later will pass metallurgy, noting inferior iron forging compared to bronze bombards favoured on the continent. They will blame rapid firing without cooling intervals, damp powder expanding gases unpredictably, Scottish weather itself. Yet the legend settles on simpler terms. Passion outran prudence. James II loved artillery, loved it so fiercely he leaned, in too close to hear it breathe. 5 centuries on, at the low ruin where Roxburgh's walls once loomed, the earthwork is little more than a grassy mound overlooking meandering water. Sheep graze, indifferent heirs to the ground where iron sang its fatal note. On certain stormy evenings, hikers claim they hear a boom rolling up the valley, though no reenactment fires that night. Mistaking thunder for distant cannon, they feel a sudden urge to step back, as if unseen fragments might still scythe through time. Pause there, if you visit, and taste rain on your tongue. Imagine smoke swirling thick as history's ink, then lifting to reveal a king determined that Scotland march with modern war, only to be left trailing behind, not by politics nor enemy blade, but by the very marvel he sought to master. Let that reflection settle like drizzle on wool, steady and chill, till it teaches a lesson older than gunpowder. When you stand too close to power you create, its burst may claim creator before foe. The August sun over Rome bleeds through the linen awnings of the Palatine like thin orange wine, bathing corridors in a glow that makes white marble blush. Somewhere beyond the colonnades, vendors shout prices for figs still warm from orchards. Mule hooves clatter on basalt paving stones. Incense curls from household shrines to 100 gods. Yet here, inside the imperial palace, the air is thick with a different perfume. Crushed roses, cinnamon oil, and the nervous sweat of courtiers who have neither slept nor gambled on the emperor's moods correctly for weeks. That emperor is a boy who insists on being called not princeps, but empress, whose 4-year reign has turned Roman protocol on its head and its senators on their heels. He was born Varius Avitus Bassianus, priest of Elagabal, the Syrian sun god from whom he now takes his throne name, Elagabalus. At 14, he rode into Rome behind a gilded chariot, silk banners glowing like dawn. promising to blend Syrian ecstasy with Roman order. At 18, he is a riptide of caprice, passion, and ritual gone strange. Whispers say he has wed at least 5 times, once to a Vestal virgin, once to a charioteer, and once, rumour claims, to the god Elagabalus himself under a midnight sky thick with drums. He hosts suppers where guests recline on violet cushions until ceilings release avalanches of rose petals that suffocate the unlucky. He decorates lounges with silver snow that turns out to be ground mica. He ordains a horse to priesthood, swaps consulships for juggling acts, and offers half the treasury to any surgeon who can transform his body to match the feminine soul he confides to moonlit mirrors. Some mornings, the emperor appears in the Senate wearing a diadem of pearls, cheeks rouged, voice soft as flute song, ordering new ovens built so sacred meteors may be baked into pastries for the sun god's festival. Other mornings, he prances through the streets in a plumed helmet, distributing gold to fishmongers while wearing nothing but a cloak dyed Tyrian purple. The city, famously tolerant of oddities, begins to twitch like an overworked mule, eager to bolt, unsure which way. Yet beneath the silken scandal flows a steady current of fear. Rome's stability rests on grain shipments, soldier pay, and the gruff loyalty of the Praetorian Guard. Those soldiers grow restless each time Elagabalus sells off state grain to fund opal necklaces or replaces their centurions with dancers chosen for lovely ankles. Senators brood in marble libraries. Merchants hoard solidi beneath floor tiles. Astrologers warn that the stars cannot sustain such inversion for long. On a stifling day in March of 222 AD, the emperor summons the guard to the temple of Jupiter, demanding they carry the black meteor stone of Elagabal through the forum so it may marry the goddess Cybele in a ceremony of bells and incense. The tribunes bow with forced grace. Then, as soon as the imperial litter vanishes behind temple columns, they confer in harsh whispers. One name surfaces again and again: Julia Maesa, the emperor's grandmother, matriarch of the Severan clan, as shrewd as any general and twice as patient. She has already placed a backup heir, her grandson, Severus Alexander, under careful education, grooming him like a pearl kept in vinegar until the outer grit dissolves. At dawn on the Ides of March, the guard receives sealed orders proclaiming Alexander their new commander, bearer of special donatives. Elagabalus, roused from a perfumed couch where he had spent the night drafting invitations to yet another feast of peacock tongues, storms into the camp draped in gold netting. He drags the trembling Alexander behind him, determined to confront the troops and reaffirm devotion. But soldiers have made their decision in silence, blades gleaming with the chill certainty of men paid to keep Rome's arteries unclogged. When Elagabalus steps onto the parade ground, a centurion salutes with apparent deference, then lunges. The first thrust pierces embroidered silk, finds pale skin, opens a crimson flower. Shock sculpts the emperor's face into porcelain stillness. Another blade follows, then another. A shout, perhaps Julia Maesa's name, dies in a wet gasp. Nearby, Alexander shakes, eyes wide, but the guard lifts him clear, blood spraying his sandals. The execution is quick, practiced. Servants whisk away the body, strip it of jewels, and tie it in burlap weighted with stones. By sundown, the corpse is dragged through back alleys, jeered at by crowds that earlier dared not speak. Too strange. To rule, someone mutters. Too bright a sun and it blinds, another says. At midnight they reach the bank of the Tiber, where refuse floats against stone pylons. One heave, cloth and emperor vanish beneath black water. Night gulls scatter. Julia Maesa orders imperial edicts scrubbed of Elagabalus's name. Statues are melted, faces chiseled into anonymity. The temple of Elagabal is rededicated. The meteor stone returns quietly to Syria. Rome exhales a breath. It feels it has held for 4 years. Alexander, 13 and soft-spoken, ascends as a puppet of senatorial compromise. The guard receives bonus pay. Grain prices stabilize. Routines resume as if a fever has broken. Yet fever, dreams linger. Citizens still wake sweating, smelling phantom roses, hearing drums that once shook the city wall. Cynical philosophers ponder which is more dangerous: an emperor who pushes boundaries until they snap, or a city so rigid that only blades correct deviation. Physicians treat prisoners poisoned by experimental cosmetics, recalling that the palace once stocked jars of powdered moonlight. Playwrights slip thinly veiled parodies into comedies. Audiences laugh too loudly, as if laughter bulwarks memory. Centuries later, scholars debate how much of the legend is smear. Some argue the boy was more victim than villain, a teenager exploring gender fluidity in an empire unequipped for nuance. Others label him a tyrant whose extravagance would have bankrupted dynasties. Archaeologists unearth coins bearing his delicate profile, wreaths of starbursts encircling a face that still looks painfully young. They find no rose petals, no petrified horse consuls, only public baths funded by his short rule and an aqueduct, improvement half finished. Stand on the Tiber's pedestrian bridge at dusk. Watch lights shimmer over dark water sliding past masonry older than memory. Imagine burlap tearing, silk streaming downstream like drowned banners, the river swallowing colour and sound. One can almost hear a whisper, half sigh, half giggle, glinting, on the ripples. I was the sun for a moment, and all of Rome blinked. Then the whisper sinks, leaving only current and moon, both indifferent. The lesson, perhaps, is that brilliance without ballast invites the swift cut of corrective darkness, or that societies, when frightened by unfamiliar light, extinguish the lamp rather than widen their gaze. Either way, let the river's hush draw you towards sleep, where dreams may parade in gowns or armor as they will, safe from tribunals, until dawn invites another quiet, ordinary day. Outside Tsarskoye Selo, the birch trees have already surrendered their last yellow leaves to November wind, and thin ice hoods the garden ponds like clouded glass. Inside the gilded rooms of the great palace, servants move in felt-soled slippers, so the empress can enjoy an illusion of silence, a rare luxury at 77, when even a window latch seems to click louder than it did in youth. Catherine Alexeyevna. Catherine, the great to foreigners, simply babushka to a few bold grandchildren, rises before sunrise on 5 November 1796, old style. She has always preferred early hours, policies read by firelight, margins filled with curt penciled notes, a samovar hissing beside the desk like a patient dragon. Today, however, there will be no correspondence. A dull ache, more annoyance than pain, pulses at the back of her head and settles behind her right eye. She waves away the maid who offers tea, reaching instead for a silver bell that summons the valet to light extra candles in the tiny water closet adjoining her bedroom. The room is scarcely larger than a wardrobe. Tiled floor, a simple wooden commode with porcelain bowl, a narrow eastern-facing window already filmed with frost. Here, Catherine attends to the most human of needs, as unceremonious in private as she is majestic in court. She steps inside, closes the door, and a few heartbeats later, the maid hears a muffled thump, as though a falling book has shaken a shelf. When no further sound follows, curiosity bends toward fear. The maid knocks, calling softly. Silence. She tests the latch, finds it unbolted, pushes inward. Catherine lies on her side, body twisted, head pressed against the skirting board. One slipper dangles from her foot. A curl of white hair has escaped its ribbon. Her eyes, usually sharp as Arctic daylight, gaze unfocused at the wall. The maid shrieks. Attendants rush in. Within minutes, the grand physician, Dr. Rogerson, kneels, fingers to her throat. A pulse stutters there, irregular, weakening, while spittle gathers at the corner of her mouth. A massive cerebral hemorrhage, he will write later, struck with the speed of a cavalry charge. They lift her onto a chaise longue in the study, drape blankets, place warmed bricks against her feet. Messages fly to St. Petersburg. Summon air. Apparent pull at once. Courtiers drift in with expressions carefully arranged between mourning and duty, each aware that an empire can pivot on the flicker of an eyelid, yet eyelids do not flicker. Through the afternoon, her breathing slows to a rattle. By 9 p.m. on 6 November, the rattle stops. Candles gutter, shadows lean, and Russia's greatest empress slips into history without a single farewell decree. Rumour, however, outraces fact. It sprints down palace corridors, leaps across Neva bridges, sails to London coffeehouses and Paris salons. Here is one version, whispered by a dismissed footman. She died on the toilet itself. Another, coarser, claims the commode seat broke, and she struck her head. Neither satisfies the European appetite for scandal. Within months, a still more lurid story hatches in émigré drawing rooms, that Catherine perished beneath a stallion in some unspeakable act of passion. The myth spreads because it thrills enemies and titillates allies, because it compresses a life of towering complexity into a single salacious tableau. Why a horse? Perhaps because she spent decades steering the empire like a rider mastering a restless mount. Perhaps because Mother of Russia sounded too close to mare in certain tongues. Perhaps simply because misogyny finds its easiest foothold in the body of a powerful woman. What matters is how quickly the lie takes root, gluing itself to her name so firmly that even 2 centuries cannot pry it loose. Yet consider the life those rumours try to eclipse. Born Princess Sophie of minor German nobility, she arrived in Russia at 14, married a moody Grand Duke who played toy soldiers in bed, staged a coup without shedding a drop of imperial blood, corresponded with Voltaire while expanding borders, farther than Peter the Great had done, modernized administration, flirted with constitutional monarchy, introduced smallpox inoculation, and founded the Hermitage so that art might civilize subjects as swords never could. She outlived multiple favorites, Orlov, Potemkin, Zubov, treating love as both solace and statescraft, rewarding affection with estates, yet discarding suitors who confused passion with power. She rode 40 miles a day, inspecting troops, drafted legal codes by candlelight, and in private delighted in bawdy anecdotes, believing laughter an indispensable spice of governance. By the time of her stroke, she has ruled 34 years, longer than Elizabeth I, almost as long as Louis XIV had, before reaching her age. Her only failure, some claim, is succession. Her estranged son, Paul, despises her policies, resents her long refusal to grant him real authority. When he arrives at Tsarskoye Selo, the morning after her death, he orders guards posted at every gate, fearing conspirators might still prefer his 11-year-old son, Alexander. He countermands Catherine's will, buries her beside Peter III, the husband she dethroned, reopens court ceremonies she had simplified, and within months overturns foreign alliances she spent years weaving. In 1801, he too will die abruptly, strangled, during a palace coup whose plotters include officers once loyal to Catherine. History can be symmetrical as a noose. What remains of the Empress herself? A heart in a silver casket at Saints Peter and Paul Cathedral, bones serene beneath a marble slab tourists tread upon, shelves of edicts and letters revealing a mind agile enough to debate Diderot, yet practical enough to haggle over naval tar, and, uninvited yet unerasable, the horse myth, cited in gutter pamphlets, revived in satirical cartoons, recycled in modern trivia lists. Every retelling pushes the actual woman further into candle shadow, until one pauses, breath slow, and senses how absurd noise can drown the softer, truer sounds of quills scratching policy, of advisers sparring over maps, of an elderly sovereign humming a French lullaby while brushing frost from her sleeve. Slide now into that softer sound. Hear the gentle tick of a porcelain clock standing in her study, marking seconds she no longer commands. Imagine the quiet after servants dim the last chandelier, footsteps fading down endless corridors gilded with her monogram. In that hush, the rumours finally fall mute, and what persists is a stillness wide enough to cradle an empire, inviting even the most restless listener to release the day's burdens and drift, unjudged, towards sleep. The cloisters of Vienne, a Provincial city tucked into a bend of the Rhône, smell of wet lime and old incense on the spring morning of 15th of May, 392 AD. On the riverbank, barges creak against moorings, white sailcloth sagging in wind so gentle it can scarcely be felt. Yet inside the imperial villa, every breath seems louder than the last, as if walls themselves are waiting to exhale. The villa once belonged to a Gallic governor. Now it houses a young emperor, whose presence carries less majesty than unease. Valentinian II is just 21, crowned at 4, protected by generals, propped up by bishops. He has spent most of his life as a figure people talk over, too small to steer, too grand to discard. A handsome boy grown into a delicate man, he moves through corridors with a practiced smile, eyes searching behind guests' shoulders for danger that might hide in silks or scripture. Today, danger does not skulk in lecture halls or parade grounds. Today it floats on bathwater, silent as steam. For years, the empire's western half has effectively been governed by a single man, Flavius Arbogast, a Frankish warlord of chilling competence. Officially, he is Magister Militum, master of soldiers. Unofficially, he is steward, regent, jailer. He greets the emperor politely each morning, but his salute clicks like shackles. Arbogast has dismissed courtiers, exiled favourites, and once, in the palace atrium, tore up an imperial edict before the young ruler's face. Valentinian, humiliated, found no legion willing to defend him. The legions obey Arbogast. Bishop Ambrose whispers from Milan that divine authority still rests with the emperor. Letters from Constantinople urge patience. Theodosius, senior emperor, in the east, will rein in the overmighty general soon. Yet seasons turn, and reinforcements never arrive. Valentinian's petitions go unanswered. Arbogast's influence grows like ivy, uncut, around the imperial seal. The villa's bathwing is modest by Roman standards, hypocauste stones for underfloor heat, a caldarium with carved dolphin spouts, a marble basin fed by warmed aqueduct water. Valentinian often prays there. Hot water loosens knots in the back and, he believes, loosens knots in the soul. Slipping free of robes embroidered with purple lobes, he steps into the tepidarium, attendants retreating to antechambers as procedure dictates. Copper braziers hiss. Thin steam swirls around half-lit mosaics of nereids and river gods. He lowers himself into the small private piscina, knees folding against cool porcelain, eyes close. For a moment, he feels neither prince nor prisoner, only a young man listening to heartbeat echo through water. Outside, sandaled footsteps approach, clink of belt buckles, hush of a short conversation, then retreating echoes. A guard posted at the far end of the corridor shifts weight, coughs once, and resumes statue-still vigil. Within the bath chamber, ripples expand, touch mosaic edges, subside. No splash follows. When attendants return minutes later carrying fresh linen, they find the emperor face down, pale arms drifting like broken reeds. Water sloshes as they haul him up. It droplets from lashes that do not blink. A healer bends to press ear against chest. No sound, but faint water trickling from the drain. In their panic, the attendants lift, shake, call his name. Dead weight answers with utter stillness. A servant races across colonnades to Arbogast's quarters. The general, sharpening a dagger shaped more for ceremony than battle, receives the news with a frown so slight it could be concentration. He orders the villa gate secured, scribes summoned, the corpse examined by military doctors only. Suicide, he instructs in a tone that allows no alternative. Within the hour, tablets are dispatched north and south. The emperor, overcome by melancholy, has taken his own life. Rumour seldom obeys tablets. Grooms whisper that bruises wring the throat. A laundress recalls seeing fresh linen smeared with something darker than bathwater. A kitchen boy claims Arbogast's Germanic guards entered the bathwing moments before the doors were barred. By sunset, tavern benches creak under men arguing murder versus despair, each weaving details from hearsay and fear. Officially, suicide by drowning is plausible. Valentinian has written doom-laden letters, complaining of powerlessness, emperor, in name only. Yet even clergy who counselled him cannot accept a final leap into fatal water. Self-murder imperils salvation. Ambrose pens a eulogy careful to preserve the boy's innocence, neither affirming nor denying suicide, threading theology around unanswered questions. Arbogast, meanwhile, acts with startling speed. He keeps the villa under heavy guard, allows no civilian magistrate to interview staff. Within days, he elevates a puppet emperor, Eugenius, a cultured rhetoric teacher pliant enough to grant the general's sweeping authority. Coins are minted with Eugenius' profile, altars rededicated. The empire's western court, once guided by a nervous youth, now groans under the armoured thumb of an ambitious soldier. But Rome remembers. Senators mutter that emperors do not drown without help. Eastern envoys inform Theodosius, who reads the report, folds it once, and instructs scribes to prepare for war. 2 years later, at the Battle of the Frigidus, Theodosius will smash Arbogast's armies, Eugenius will be executed, and the Frankish general will fall on his own sword beside alpine rocks slick with autumn rain. The victors will declare they fought to avenge Valentinian's murder and restore divine order. Whether political convenience or genuine outrage, the emperor's bathtub death becomes a banner for armies to march beneath. Valentinian's body travels in a cedar coffin to Milan, then Ravenna, and finally to the imperial mausoleum in Rome. His sarcophagus lies near those of mightier forebears, Gratian, Constantine, even Hadrian's marble urn not far away. Yet his epitaph is brief, vivit in Deo. He lives in God. No mention of water, of loneliness, of shackles invisible to all but him. Centuries later, medieval chroniclers embroider the story with details they feel it lacks. Poison slipped into spiced wine before the bath. A gold torque used as garrote. A forged suicide note smudged by wet hands. Renaissance painters imagine pale limbs floating in candlelit pools. A single sandal drifting like a dying swan's wing. Modern historians, passing, scant letters and contradictory panegyrics conclude only this: opportunity favours accusation. In an empire where daggers and gossip cut alike, a bathtub can be deeper than oceans. Walk today through Vienne's quiet archaeological park, where foundation stones of the villa still lie, half reclaimed by grass. The Rhone whispers beyond plain. Trees, distant highway noise mutters like washed-out drums. Lean over a roped-off trench and picture steam curling from invisible baths, perfumed by oils long evaporated. Picture a young man craving something simpler than thrones can give. An untroubled breath, a moment of privacy. Here, in the hush between car engines, the faint drip of water from a basin, the thud no one was prepared to hear. Then let twilight gather, soft and impartial. Let the river's endless current show how small any throne is against time's tide. Close your eyes. Listen to water glide over stones. Feel the mind loosen, as if soaking away its tensions, and drift toward rest, knowing. That history, like the bath, holds stories peaceful and violent in the same silent pool. Moonlight spills across castle ruins and quiet riverbeds like silver sand, smoothing the harsh outlines of broken walls, softening memories that in daylight still smell of gun smoke, pastry, or lamprey grease. After 15 curious, comical, sometimes brutal exits, the parade of royal ghosts pauses at the edge of sleep, waiting for us to notice what they share beyond crowns and calamity. Before we set their stories gently on a shelf and drift toward new chapters, let us linger in the hush between heartbeats and gather the patterns their departures trace. Threads of power, pride, chance, and flesh, so fine they can slip unnoticed through centuries until a voice, late at night, invites us to see them shining in the dark. In every tale, the jeweled band means nothing under linen or iron. A coronet cannot thicken stomach walls against 14 bowls of semla. Ermine robes cannot cushion a king's hip when a cannon fragment scythes through rain. George II, perched on porcelain, wore golden garters. Sigur the Mighty tied trophies to his saddle. Catherine surveyed continents from St. Petersburg's amber halls. Yet bone, blood, and bewilderment equalize them the instant nature, or negligence, calls due. The lesson is not that power is folly, but that it is provisional, a lease with no renewal clause, signed in flesh. If realization dawns too late, it may arrive in a privy, a rice chest, or a bathtub where titles dissolve like salt. Food, drink, laughter, warmth, pleasures meant to sweeten existence, become sharpened instruments when taken past need. Adolf, Frederick's desserts, Henry's lampreys, Martin's unstoppable mirth, Charles II's brandy-soaked wrappings. Each pleasure tips suddenly from comfort to catastrophe, as though the body keeps secret ledgers and, at a line unseen, declares, bankruptcy. We recognize the pivot because we feel smaller echoes every day, a second slice too many, a joke that leaves ribs aching. History magnifies our private stumbles into public parables, warning us that indulgence, like flint and steel, waits only for one stray spark. Human schemes invite cosmic punchlines. A Viking who defeats his foe with doubled numbers is defeated by the dead man's tooth. An emperor who seeks immortality brews his own poison. A king who trusts modern artillery stands too near the barrel he adores. These ironies do not arise from fate's malice, but from the tension between ambition and limitation, between the stories we tell ourselves, I am invincible, I am destined, and the quieter story written in bacteria, mercury molecules, thermal stress. When the dissonance grows loud enough, reality resolves it with a gesture so absurd it feels scripted. Yet no playwright is required, only the physics of metal, the chemistry of blood, the psychology of power. A stroke in a water closet becomes a stable-yard scandal. A candle-touched bandage grows into divine retribution. An unverified spear beneath. A latrine outlives every royal charter. The gap between event and explanation is where imagination rushes in, propelled by envy, awe, or the sheer delight of scandal. To remember this is to read all history in pencil, aware that erasures and marginal doodles share the same parchment as decrees. Listen closely, and you can hear the scratch of revisions continuing even now, reshaping reputations long after bones have cooled. Royal etiquette cloaks bodily functions, mental illness, and fear behind velvet screens, yet each story pulls the curtain aside. A prince's psychosis pacing midnight halls, a pope's vice stretching beneath embroidered sheets, an empress's aging heart surrendering on polished tiles. We modern listeners lean closer, not out of mockery, but recognition. We know in our quiet moments the tremor of panic, the twinge of overindulgence, the hush of a locked bathroom door. When kings falter in those intimate spaces, grandeur shrinks to scale. We do not delight in the fall so much as find company there. A monkey's bite reorders Greek politics. A cannon misfire destabilizes a Scottish regency. A lamprey feast opens 2 decades of English civil war. Death arrives as anecdote, yet consequences spill beyond anecdote into treaties, successions, and frontiers. The pattern is fractal. A small absurd trigger blossoms into widescreen tragedy, or occasionally progress, reminding us that no event is isolated. Even our smallest choices tremor outward across loved ones, colleagues, and strangers we will never meet. For all the gravity, we are permitted to smile, carefully, kindly, at the bizarre geometry of these endings. History's comedic timing is not cruelty, but catharsis, offering release after centuries of solemn statues and pompous portraits. To chuckle at dessert-induced demise or toilet tragedy is to acknowledge the cosmic humor laced through existence, the same humor we feel when a hat blows off into traffic, or a solemn speech is punctuated by a sneeze. If we withhold that gentle laughter, we deny the full spectrum of what it is to be alive. As each lesson settles, eyelids droop. Our minds, like royal treasuries after a long reign, feel both lighter and richer. Lighter for having spent anxiety on others' missteps, richer for carrying their wisdom into dreams. In the hush that replaces fireworks of intrigue, we hear something softer. A distant lute, a garden fountain, the hush of linen settling. That hush invites a turning of the page, from palace corridors littered with irony to a new story where courage beats under quieter stars. Imagine now a vast candle-lit hall whose walls are every castle, palace, and temple you have visited tonight. Thrones stand empty, silver, oak, jade, each draped in the faintest cobweb, each touched by moon dust. Along the floor lie discarded crowns and scepters, not broken, merely set aside. No guards pace, no courtiers whisper. Instead, there is a long, low table laid with simple bread, a carafe of cool water, and chairs sized not for monarchs, but for travellers weary from story walking. You enter, take a seat. Night air drifts through high arches, stirring banners that once carried eagles, dragons, lilies, all now faded to gentle grey. From the shadows, the ghosts appear, not in regalia, but in humble tunics, curiosity replacing pride. Adolf Frederick smiles ruefully at a lone sweet roll. George II adjusts a makeshift cushion. Sigurd chuckles, half embarrassed, half defiant. They nod to you, acknowledging shared frailty. No accusations, no judgments, just fellowship after theatre. One by one, the ghosts gather at the table. Some offer thanks for listening, others shrug, as if to say what a ride. When the last chair is filled, quiet descends so softly it feels physical, like snowfall. Eyes grow heavy. A single candle burns low, its flame bobbing with your breath. Somewhere distant, a nightingale sings. You recognize in that moment how every ending, grand, grisly, or ridiculous, is a doorway to rest. The royals have walked through theirs. Now you walk through yours. A doorway edged with soft linen sheets and the promise of morning light. Close the grand doors gently behind you. They will remain, stories intact, whenever curiosity returns. For now, the hall darkens, the candle winks out, and all that remains is the steady rhythm of your own heartbeat, calmer than any drum of war, truer than any succession oath, guiding you into sleep's quiet kingdom, where crowns weigh nothing, lampreys cannot harm, and laughter, if it comes, will be light as dream dust. And now, let the echoes of crowns and candlelight drift into the hush of night. May their curious endings settle like dust upon closed eyes, guiding you toward dreams soft as turning pages. Sleep well. Tomorrow's dawn will find these stories still waiting. But for now, rest is the sweetest kingdom.